Okay. Welcome, everyone. My name is Maria, and on behalf of the Cote-Saint-Luc Public Library, I want to thank Linda Leith Publishing and the Cote-Saint-Luc Women's Social Club for partnering with us on this event. I also invite you to purchase books that are available over there in the back left. I don't know what that was. Our author today is Marilyn Bowering. She is an award-winning writer, essayist, and poet whose first novel, To All Appearances a Lady, was a New York Times notable book of 1990. Her second novel, Visible Worlds, was shortlisted for the prestigious Orange Prize, nominated for the Dublin Impact Prize, and awarded the Ethel Wilson Fiction Prize. Her third novel, Cat's Pilgrimage, is a psychological map in the format of an album of human and animal stories. Her novel, What It Takes to Be Human, is also a map of survival in a world where human qualities are increasingly under threat. Today, she'll be discussing her newest novel, the 2025 The Unfinished World. Our moderator today, for those who haven't had the pleasure, is renowned Montreal writer Elaine Kalman Naves. Elaine was born in Hungary and grew up in Budapest, London, and Montreal. For many years, she was literary columnist for the Montreal Gazette and is the author of 8 books, many of them also award-winning. Elaine's other honors include a Canadian Literary Award for Personal Essay, 2 Quebec Writers Federation Prizes for Nonfiction, and 2 Jewish Book Awards for Holocaust Literature. Please make sure your cell phones are on silent for the duration of the event, and let's give them a big round of applause while they turn on their microphones.
Thank you, Maria. Is this okay? Can you hear me? Okay. So thank you for that very over-generous introduction on my take. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to the library, which that I think it's one of the finest libraries, not only Canada as a public library. I'm still a member here since the time when it was the library is located at there. And I see a few where it was many years ago, too many years ago to count, but it was a wonderful, wonderful place. And it's been that way for me. I've done a lot of my research here, and I'm a faithful out-of-town member. So it's also my great pleasure to share with you Marilyn's latest book, the visionary novel, Hi, and it's nice to meet you here.
Thank you.
The Unfinished is really a fascinating and original book. It's difficult to classify because it's so many things. It's the real world in realism and in science. So as I was reading it in the last little while, I heard it in my head as a call to fiercely protect our planet, our natural and threatened and belligerent environment. Before we talk about your book, Marilyn, I'd like to talk with you a little bit about yourself and your long and distinguished career as a poet, a novelist, and playwright. Tell us a little bit about your beginnings in Winnipeg and in Victoria, where you live now.
Well, my family, my father's family originated in Newfoundland, and they moved to Winnipeg. My mother's family made their way from Ontario to Winnipeg, and my parents. That's where I was born. And then a number of the members of the family moved west for better weather, you know. My grandparents first, and then various uncles and aunts, and then we moved when I was a child. I think partly impelled by the Winnipeg flood, but I was a baby really when that happened, and we had evacuated to the west coast of that My parents decided we were going to.
How old are you? Do you have memories?
Well, I do actually. I was very little. I was only about one and a half. But I remember watching my parents move and tie the refrigerator to the stairs to kind of keep it out of the floodwaters. And I also remember a canoe, our neighbors in the canoe from the back door, and wanting very much to go into it, but I wasn't allowed to.
So water or at a very early age, and
Yeah.
not perhaps in a place of the we here associate with flooding, but there you have it in right. So
Yeah.
so your studies were at the University of Victoria predominantly.
Yes, they were predominantly there. Yeah.
So one of the things that I read in my research is that you're gifted in music, that you studied piano, that you taught music, and also that you have, you're a visual artist as well. I want you to know that the cover of the Unfinished World is a painting by Marilyn, and it's not often that we get an author whose work is so beautiful, in my opinion. Cool. So I'm going the roundabout way about this, but like, how did you become a writer?
Well, there was no tradition of writers or artists at that point in my family. There is now, but none of the younger members are writers and artists. So I was a real outlier by interest generally, although my parents were very supportive of the music. And I played the piano and also played in a brass band. And I always liked to paint. I'm not I can't call myself a visual artist. I do paint a little bit. But those were things that nobody else was interested in. So they were engineers and, doctors or, all kinds of things. But the arts
Professional.
the arts were, my father was a builder. He was an outlier. And my mother had her own career. So that was very unusual amongst her circle.
What did you do?
Well, she began as a legal secretary and she ended up being the first woman purchasing agent. And the first president of that society. She was a model and went to university later than that. How did I become a writer? I wrote poetry. I was supposed to be paying attention in church and I couldn't. And I, would kind of sneak out a little something to write in, and I would write poetry while the minister was speaking, and I, felt I knew everything he was going to say anyway. That was very instinctive to write poetry. It wasn't any good, but and then as I went on in university, I was going to law school, and at that point there were very few women. I thought that would be a good thing to do. I applied to 3 universities. I applied to UBC, Osborne Hall, and U of T. They all accepted me. And somehow, unbeknownst to me, communicated with each other and said, well, where are you going to go? At that point, I thought, I'm not going anywhere. I want to write. And I told my parents this. My mother would take me back. My father said, well, dear, you've chosen a very difficult path. So I started to study under the poet and Celtic father, Novelist.
So could you make a living writing poetry back then?
Well, probably a bit better than that.
Okay, so you did many things in the literary world. I think you were.
I was teaching, editing, anything that would come my way, except the commissions. I had quite a lot of radio drama work at one point.
Yes. Think about your grandfather. Your grandfather went to war.
My grandfather was a soldier.
Yeah.
I got very interested in him. He he had been a Bernardo boy. I don't know if we know what that was.
So
We
know, I know.
yeah, he was his parents had died in London, England, and he and his brother were taken into care by the Barnardo Society and sent to Canada as child immigrant. He was 11 years old and his brother was 12, and they were sent to work in Ontario farms separately. Eventually, when he was 14, they ran away to work in the railway. He memorized all the railway timetables. And as soon as the First World War broke out, they joined up and to get back to their families because there were other children who had been they lost. So that was important to me, and I wrote about his story about how
And that became
a radio
radio drama. There were others, you know, but he was great.
Yes, well, that came about as a commission from a Radio Scotland BBC producer called Marilyn Imrie. And we've been discussing what we might do. And at one point, she just said, well, I'm Marilyn, you're Marilyn. What about Marilyn Monroe? And as soon as I heard that, I was interested. And I felt growing up with her presence around, I could into that. And that became briefly a play, and now it's not around the world. It's under production this spring in 2 places, New Jersey. And I think it's been 7 or 8 different translations for another play.
Very, very interesting, and it leads. So, how did you get into writing the first novel?
Oh, well, that what kind of happens to me is there'll be something that just gets on my mind, and I start to think about it and worry about it a little bit. And it was basically, where am I? And this was in Victoria, and I felt such incongruency between my perceptions of where I lived and what it was about, and the things that I knew about the city and the people in it, and how it was portrayed from the outside as a very British place, with not much interest in ever having happened there. And so I began to look into that initially with the idea of writing poetry, but the story could not be contained in that kind of story that I wanted to do. So that's it.
So, if we were getting close to talking. It was British Columbia, and empathy for the natural world comes from it. It's me you can't hear?
Can you hear me? Okay, that's better. I'm terribly sorry. I'm good. Oh,
It's me. It's me. It's most unlike me to. Okay, well, so, okay, I was gonna have to hold it again. Okay, is this better? Yes. Like this? So sorry. So sorry. Not usually hard to hear me, but to repeat this question, a great deal of your writing is lyrical, poetic, dreamlike, and a lot of it is about the natural world, and in particular, the ocean and the rivers of British Columbia. I'd like to know, or to share with us, where does this great affinity and empathy for the natural world come from? Not just please.
Well, it's a good question. I've always thought it was just normal. But I do understand there are people who haven't had haven't had the opportunities that I've had to as when I grew up, which is around the ocean, in the ocean, swimming in the ocean, um, with my father and uncles. And also, I think especially for my mother, who's not a lady. So found that just always reminded. She loved to hike, went on many family hikes throughout Vancouver Island and the Olympics. But so found that we were you know, how could mountain all these Mount Baker, which she loved in particular. So I think it just seemed to me. The places that I lived were always so close to the other. But that was about maybe 7 or 8 years ago now, I really could say, we walked on the backs of fish, which was about that sense of abundance and how that has changed. Because they used to say that the fish, the salmon in particular, were such abundance that you could actually cross from one side of the fish with the feet dry. You walk on the back. And now it's
Pretty amazing.
yeah. And I thought there's forest in a log. Talk about the traffic where the trees are so big. Well, course, that is fantastically changing now. And so I would say it's a good story. And to many other people, and I need to do what you can in terms of at least representing what that world has been and what it contains. Looking at important to remember.
So, following on that is a quote from your novel that I'm going to ask you to comment on and maybe elaborate on even more. Thousands of ordinary people understand the relationship between the human and natural world instinctively because it is an unfinished relationship. So talk a little bit about that, and is that supposed to make us think of the title, which is The Unfinished World?
Well, I don't know that I was thinking of it particularly, but I do believe that in general the title is about nothing is fine. And that in part is my optimism, but it's also kind of faith in the continuing development of things have not stopped, that we're not going to be changing too, that we to a large extent share in the book. There is a specific thing in girl who love and water and fish, and so that's not finished. And the stories, there are multiple stories in the novel that intertwine with Earl's story. She's a contemporary character, a young woman, and they all show patterns that are linked to her. At some point, like time and place, and that's very difficult to.
Thank you. So, getting more specific about the novel, so there are almost 20 years between this novel and your last one, and I know that you were working on other projects. It's not to imply that you've been lying fallow in on this time, but has this novel been particularly hard for you to write?
Yes, it has. But the one before that, what it takes to live was easy to write. It's odd because it was set in an asylum for criminally insane men.
Not quite you.
But that character, he was kind of straightforward. I knew that he had capacity. This novel was much more about looking for where a young person particularly find a resource to carve out a life and perhaps find a love or and trying to be environmental necessities of the world and stand up in some way to pressures of global and but it had a root excuse me, in a book I read. So the word of the book Bible, and it was a book that said made an argument for the woman. And I thought that was interesting, and particularly that the woman itself was suggesting. Probably they said from the city of Gadir, which is now Cadiz in southern Spain, where they have been women who trained as in all the arts and science were well known for the ability as well. That got me thinking about what would carry on the story. And I was living in Spain. And so, I mean, many of the things they put certain stories began to reflect around my life experiences, places and the particularly the Spanish connection, the immigration pattern that I could see coming from the Middle East all the way into the New World, up to the coast of around where I live in Vancouver Island. There are many places Spanish were the earliest and named everything. But until I lived in Spain, a lot about that, you know, Cordova Day is actually poured about Spain and many other places. So it all I just
So that's, you know, I led right into my next question, which was that you have lived in many different places, and so these travels have fed your imagination. And
I'm really, I think, fortunate to have been able to I mean, not as many as them, to actually, it's quite significant where I had to, you know, raise and to find some way.
yeah, no, there are many different influences in this book, and obviously you've mentioned some of the social, environmental, and perhaps can we talk about spiritual concerns that have influenced you as you wrote this?
Yeah, I well, be able to construct a life which is I'll use it to make your identity. And I was raised in families, a lot of it around the kitchen. My grandparents were Newfoundland. Yeah. And my uncle didn't have stories. They were different with kids, so we gathered around the table and their stories. And then I go into the kitchen and their stories. So I think identity is very much rooted. And
That's okay, because the spirituality in the book, I mean, it's there's sections where let's say the Christian influence is really negative. There are places where, you know, we can sort of feel a kind of some of the spirituality of the indigenous people. I hesitate to get more specific, but those things have all influenced you in some way.
Well, certainly I learned about how place and the environment from the beginning, like I said, and coming to know some of the influences that was important, but it was more. I've always learned about place and connected to it through and being on the land, on the ground,
Connected.
it felt that in Greece, I didn't know Greek mythology before I went to Greece. I learned a lot of Greek, the same. And for example, one of the tales is in the 12th century, which is the Vandalians. So that was a war of King Alfonso VII as a crusader against the domination to and in Spain they got along with it pretty well. But a big period where there was a protest that conquest was basically portrayed in the beginning. Another character is a boy, who's a young apprentice.
William.
Yeah. Troubadour, and he's absolutely adheres to the ideology of his king. He's been rescued by them. He's an orphan. A lot of the children in my book are orphans. And he actually facilitates a terrible slaughter during the battle. But he also looking after the girl who he was able to rescue from the sea. And that engendered the love in him shows a cute capacity, but really not suggesting that change and totally. But I found that interesting to think about going out beyond the immersion.
So, but this fictional character, this troubadour, is again set against a real historical event, the siege.
Yeah.
So I find that it grounds the different eras that you choose to explore. They come at sort of key moments in history. What made you choose, or what process was it that, you go right back to biblical times? And perhaps I'm anticipating the order in which we ought to be going, but you study biblical, you set events against biblical times, against events in ancient Greece, then the Crusades, but not necessarily in an arc that's chronological. In fact, it isn't. The only the actual chronology is the chronology about it's set in the present world, which centers on the character Pearl, who we'll talk about in a minute. Can you talk about this a little bit?
Yeah. Well, sometimes when I was writing the book, I think, well, I could be writing 6 different novels, and but every time I had that thought, I rejected. I wanted to bring these resources together for that character. The chronology, I struggled with it. I tried different things, but what finally occurred to me was simply that tell the stories. I wrote the stories and let them show what the character needs and what we want to help. So
The character here being Pearl.
yes, will help Pearl and her for instance, there's a second tale in the story by adolescent girl called Rosa San Blas, which is the head of the Spanish labor reporters in the of Mexico, and she makes a mistake. her mistake is to believe that the attention she receives from a man is actually the mother's mother, isn't it, for her? And this causes all. And so as this story unrolls, and you see this young girl, with all the difficulty with adolescence, trying to navigate her way through this grand pageant. One of the things that my character Pearl learns is that don't stay in the delusion. You got like but this is not real. Get out. She realizes that she was stuck. She has to stop being unrealistic about what she is doing.
So this would be a good moment for you to read something at the very beginning of the book, which is one of the epigraphs on the epigraph.
I'm just going to ask you to bring the microphone a little closer so that we can hear. Yes.
Okay. Sorry, to leave it. Or is that better? No. Is that better? No.
Maybe try holding the book up a little higher.
How about that? Okay, I'll have to hold up to this. More than anything, she likes to swim. When she swims, there's nothing to think about but making the turn at the end of the lane as smoothly as possible. To and fro, while memory gathers its forces into a tale she can live with. In the water, all wounds heal. In the water, she heads for her beginning over and over until she gets out of the pool, showered and dresses, and re-enters the world.
So it's so evocative of the swimming world, and I have to ask you, you yourself are a swimmer.
I swim. I'm not a swimmer. Not like Pearl
Not
is.
like Pearl.
But swimming, I've always swum. When I was a child, we spent our summers at a lake, and before you were allowed to water ski, you had to swim all the way across the lake. So one of my uncles would row the boat, and he for some reason, he was a public health engineer, but he would always sing Alouetta as we were all swimming across the lake. I don't know why. So I'm good. I'm a good floater. I'm a good survivor in the water. My daughter was a competitive swimmer, and so some of that comes from my spending many an hour with her at competitive swim meets.
So again, I'm going to prompt a reading. I'm going to pick a passage to illustrate your descriptive powers, almost at random, because there's so many about the water. So this is the one on page 50 to the top of page 52.
At this point, my character Pearl has kind of fled in a sailboat that she has, and she's anchored off a small island off the coast of California. A miracle. A little bay Pearl has known since childhood, but never seen like this. She crouches on the deck of Sea-Pin, balanced against the rail, dawn light on her skin and on the wheat-colored grass at the point to the east. But it is the water that holds her attention. From the foot of the granite cliffs to the rocky little beach and to Sea-Pin's keel, a shallow cut in the glassy sea of silver and gray, float millions of tiny crustaceans. They are an inch or two below the surface, so that looking at them is like peering inside the orb of a clouded eye. Pink and coral, they quaver as if in a medium of jelly. Thousands and thousands of them, thumbnail-sized and less. Pearl finds a word for them. Krill. They are their own primal soup.
So beautiful. Have you witnessed something like that?
I have. Yeah, I have. And I have in mind I know the island where she goes to. And I had that experience of waking up in the morning in my sailboat and looking out and seeing these incredible nations of all these pink and colored crustaceans in the water. Absolutely extraordinary.
Was one of the great pleasures of this book is coming across many, many passages like that in the water and in the forest. So I hope many of you will share the experience that I had reading this. Um, um, Talk a little bit. Pearl is on a quest, and it's discovery and self-discovery, but a lot of it hinges on her relationship with her grandmother. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, at the beginning of the book, Pearl has a meeting, a coffee with her grandmother, who she hasn't seen for some time. Her grandmother's name is Nora, and her grandmother was asked to see her. Pearl had grown up with her grandmother in her grandmother's house, but Pearl's kind of gone her own way, and the way, although she doesn't want her grandmother to know this, has not proved to be too successful. She's had a terrible disaster in love. She's been, betrayed and
In a big way.
in a big way, financially as well, although she doesn't know the extent of this at the story's beginning. But she's living in her ex-partner's van, and she's hidden it from him so he won't throw her out of it. So she meets with her grandmother, and her grandmother has a request that she makes of her. She wants to give her these dolls, these small little dolls that have been in the family for generations and handed down from all the way through. And she asks her to take the ones that she wants, and Pearl refuses. She doesn't want them, and she also asks her to reminds her that she knew there were stories associated with them. She asked her granddaughter to write them down for her and to remember them. And Pearl is involved in her own world. She has a little business she's trying to run. It's called Save Our Souls, and it's about reconnecting young people to the natural world, but it's through podcasts and blogs and trying to sort of monetize the primitive food. And so she writes about things. She has her own version of primal soup, which she tries to get people interested in, which is made of algae. And so she's doing these things, but at a very shallow level. And her grandmother asks her to do things she refuses. And I don't think it's spoiling things to say, because it does set the book off. Her grandmother dies very shortly afterwards, which is really the point of her grandmother asked her to go on a journey with her to visit certain places. And again, Pearl had refused all of this. And after her grandmother's death, it turns out that her grandmother had made a request of her. Pearl has left some of her grandmother's property, but she's asked to take her grandmother's ashes to the places she had loved. And as she does so, she discovers that her grandmother has left each of these dolls there for her to find. And then she begins to recover the story from each of the dolls. And as I said, then each story pushes it forward.
But so this is one of the really beguiling aspects of this dreamy and beguiling novel is this tradition of ancestral dolls passed down through generations that culminate in Nora and Pearl. So why don't you read a little section about the dolls, and then we'll discuss it. It's on page 270.
Pearl crawled into bed, her thoughts thick. The doll's stories flipped through her mind, each one illuminating the others. The dolls were like footprints, like breadcrumbs, or still life objects stored in a palace of memory, a palace that Nora said contained the rooms of your life. All you knew and learned and all you had inherited was stored in them, but you had to make a map to find your way through, like the storytellers did.
So talk about this tradition of ancestral dolls. Like, where did this idea come to you? And there is a real tradition of this sort, right?
Yes, there is of dolls. It goes back to ancient times where people kept dolls and use them to remember things. I first came across it in a book written by Adele Wiseman, and it's called Old Woman at Play. It was about her mother who used to make little dolls, which were to commemorate and remember events that had taken place in the her Ukrainian village and Ukrainian Russian village in her childhood. And that village, of course, had suffered a lot of persecution, and her family had eventually fled to North America from there. But I saw some of those dolls.
I think.
Yeah, that she had made, and they were extraordinary, made of bits of cloth and bits of buttons and all kinds of things. And she would explain the stories that were involved in it with the dolls. If you can still look, if you can find it, it's just a marvelous book about creativity and memory.
Probably in the library here.
I hope so. I hope so.
It's surprising what isn't in this library.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful library.
That was where I first came across it.
Yeah, so Old Woman at Play.
Old
Yes.
Woman at Play.
Yeah. So that was what, there are several dolls that Pearl finds, and it not necessarily in chronological order.
Yeah.
Okay. So I was just thinking, like, wouldn't it have been easier for Marilyn to start at the beginning, which is in biblical times?
Well, it didn't work.
No.
That's all I can tell you. It didn't work when I tried to structure it that way. And so as I think I mentioned, I could just think, well, that's what my character needed at that point, that story, to push her
Forward
forward
in her own life.
Yeah.
And at one point, when she's sort of beset by a financial disaster, she plunges. Pearl actually plunges into the water and as an escape route. So
Yeah.
it is very, very compelling. The novel, like you alluded to already, The Siege of Almeria. Your novel doesn't shy away from difficult subjects. If we're painting this idea that it's all misty and lyrical and beautiful, which it is, there's some really, really tough stuff. You've talked about how pristine and beautiful Vancouver Island was when in your childhood. You give many examples of the degradation of the environment, of the clear cutting of forests, of using the oceans as dumping ground. And you also show awful things happening to some of your most vulnerable characters. In particular, I found that you show great sensitivity in your treatment of children through this goes across the ages. There's a character whom Pearl adopts, a young refugee boy, for him, and that's in the present.
Yes.
But there's also Rib and Yamha and Margetta. So without going into exactly what happens to them and very difficult things, why is this your orientation? The vulnerable child.
The why, again, I think it's kind of, it's personal and it's general. The general part is we have to look after our children, and they're not being looked after in many cases, and they are vulnerable, and yet many children do survive, or we see them suffer, and but that and the environment are the prime things we have to do. I do think some of it comes from knowing some of my mother's story, who had lost her mother when she was young, and my grandfather's who'd been sent away as a child, and the reality is that children are terribly vulnerable, and they we do often, maybe not knowingly, but abandon them So I don't, it's a bit difficult for me to answer that when I feel it just very, very deeply. It's right in my heart that that is where we have to put our care. And I'm a grandmother too, so that's what
It certainly inhabits the sensibility of the book. So again, it you will reader will understand better if the reader reads the book. And I'd like it on that subject. Um, you know, also there's some incredibly tight plotting leading up to the climax of the book in the last section. Up to the last page. And I really was reading almost breathlessly towards the end to find out what would happen. And I will not talk about that because I don't want to spoil that for all of you who I hope are going to read the book. Marilyn, thank you for this rich and beautifully written novel. And if there are questions, I think there's time for some.
Thank you so much, Elaine. Thank you. Appreciate it.
So while you're thinking, I do have something because I'm a nonfiction writer, primarily a nonfiction writer. So I'm always very, very interested in the research, in the research. Can you talk about the role and the amount of research and the type of research that you conducted as you were writing this book that, it ranges in time and place and includes so many, scientific as well as poetic facts?
Well, I've always believed in writing fiction. There are a couple of things. One is that things that are real and really happen are often more spectacular than the things you make up. So I'm always alert to that level of occurrence. And also, I think it just works much better if you have a really secure factual line. So I do a lot of research. I try to keep as much as possible as I can anchored to the real world. Because we are in the real world. I was brought up as a fundamentalist Christian, which I think you sort of picked up on some of that, which I do not adhere to and did not adhere to. But that in another work I've done centers very much on Scottish Gaelic beliefs and poetry, and in the Scottish Gaelic world, the other world is continuous with this world. It's not up there or out there or anywhere. It's a continuity. And so I think that the world of fact and the world of spirituality and the world is all part, and the world of sort of multiple species, it's all one, it's all connected. And so I do a lot of research. Sometimes it's going to places, often it's going to places, just being there and on the ground. Every place I could get to in the book I went to or had been to. So Nootka Sound, for example, there was a Spanish settlement at.
It's quite far north, right?
Yes. Well, it's just off the coast of northern Vancouver Island.
Right.
And so there had been a Spanish settlement there. That was the most northerly Spanish settlement. And actually, when the Spanish and the British made an agreement about who owned Vancouver Island, it was actually called the Island of Quadra and Vancouver. Some other Quadra got dropped. But I have part of a story set there. And so I went there and I talked to people and I looked around, and that's the kind of thing that I like to do. And then I can back up in an archive or read, explorers' accounts or others' accounts. So,
and the salmon, the hatchery, that was really interesting because Pearl has this very definite idea. I only eat wild salmon, says. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Well, yeah. I mean, the subject of fish hatcheries and fish farms is some would call it controversial. To me, it's not controversial. My personal belief is they shouldn't be there, that they cause too much damage. But Pearl actually ends up working on a fish farm with a fish biologist, and there's a love story that unfolds there. And I'd like to say that there is sometimes love does work out, um, but the story of the salmon is important too, because the salmon is such a fundamental, um, fundamental, fundamental to the all life on the West Coast, all animal and human life actually, and also it's such a story of going home and regeneration and transformation, and so that also played a part in her journey.
Or no? Yes?
Yeah.
Okay. You mentioned you lived in Spain and Greece.
Yeah.
I'm curious, what motivated you to move there? And if you went by yourself or with your family? And besides Canada, is there any other countries that you inhabited?
Yeah, Greece was when I was quite young, and I was, just heading off to see what I could find. And I was with a boyfriend at that time, and ended up living on the island of Paros, and also did a lot of exploring around the mainland, the Greek mainland, and other islands, and have been back a bit, but not as much as I would like to. But lived there for a few years, so I felt quite rooted there at the time. And in Spain, uh, I went with my family. My husband was working with a Canadian company which was involved with the World's Fair in Seville. So we were in Seville for about 2.5 years. And again, I traveled around a lot. And interestingly enough, at least to me, there was quite a bit of uh, there were quite a few associations which were doing Spanish and English um, uh, conferences and so on. And I was at the first women's conference at the Universidad de Complutense in Madrid. There'd never been an only women's conference before. And so that was very exciting. And then I've spent a lot of time in Scotland, starting again when I first met Michael, who became my husband. And he's Scottish originally, so we've gone back and forth a lot and lived various times there, sometimes in Edinburgh and sometimes in the Highlands.
I'm glad somebody asked about Spain because that's what I was going to ask. But my question is, does it really depend on one's receptivity, the time in one's life, when one can respond appropriately and inspiringly to the environment? Was it the time in your life when Spain did actually speak to you and inspired the poetry?
In Spain?
Yes.
Yeah.
Always in Spain.
Pardon me, always in Spain? Yeah, I thought it's been difficult when I first moved there. I found it the most difficult of anywhere else I'd lived initially. And I made one great good friend there who's an artist, an absolute wild woman, Mercedes Carbonell, who's a portrait artist, amongst other things. And she sort of took me around and, would chide me for doing things like doing up my seatbelt, and she sort of tried to loosen all my restraints in every way possible. And the environment is great. That was actually one of the starting points for the essay I mentioned when we walked on the backs of fish. I went to a beach with her down in the south of Spain, and we're sitting at the beach, and we have our little children with us, and I'm just appalled. The beach is just knee deep in litter and just appalling. Like, it's a beautiful beach, but just so dirty. And I'm kind of watching my daughter. I think, oh God, how am I going to keep her out of this or that? And my friend is sitting next to me saying, "Oh, Marilyn, it's so beautiful. Have you ever seen any place like it?" And I'm thinking, well, at home at that point, things are, I've never seen anything like this. I've never seen that kind of litter and garbage and so on. So in the negative way, it affected me. And again, in the positive way, by walking, by going places, by going in the hills, and particularly the Sierra de Ronda, not that whole area, and visiting caves and doing all of that, I began to develop a feeling for that and its ancient roots, and also the mix of cultures there, the Arabic and the well, everything there, and yes, particularly still.
When you develop
Pearl as your main character. Did you see yourself in Pearl at all when you wrote about her life and how she reacted to things?
She's much smarter than I was. She's way smarter. She actually learned quite quickly. There were bits of it. So yes, me, to some pieces of it. She ends up teaching. She teaches actually computer science in a northern BC town. And she's able to do so on a contract basis. And that was something, not computer science, but I was able to teach. Again, these things go in cycles. You know, there's a time when they wouldn't let anybody who is not accredited teach, and now they do again because it's so hard to get enough teachers. But anyway, so there's some of me and also some of my daughter and her friends, things I've been looking at. I find that the kind of concerns that are around me, and they often do connect with family, are what go into the characters.
This girl is quite a young, quite a young person compared to us.
Yeah, she is. She's in her late 20s. She's in her 20s. Yeah.
And to be able to sort of project yourself into the persona of, and to know all the stuff about, the computers and all these various things that, some of us might be out of touch with. All I can say now is thank you for this rich and beautifully written novel, Marilyn. It's been a great pleasure to talk with you, and I hope that you sell many books.
Thank you very much.
Not you, but Linda and Felicia Feldman.
Okay. Thanks again.